A Mafia boss was tricked into a Christmas blind date, but when the woman across from him said his brother's name, his body gave out before his mind could fight it. Not because the name was secret, but because it belonged to the only person Alex Stone failed to save. And the worst part wasn't that she knew it. It was how she said it. Quietly. Carefully. Like the name still mattered. Alex Stone walked into the diner on December 22nd, expecting numbers. A brief meeting. Coffee? Then gone. That was how he survived December, by pretending Christmas was just another week and that warm lights meant nothing. The place was dressed like a lie. Strings of soft bulbs traced the windows. Ornaments caught the glow. Outside, snow pressed against the glass, turning the world gentle in a way Alec no longer trusted. Inside, the air smelled of heat and cinnamon. Comfort he hadn't earned. Comfort he didn't want. He took the corner booth out of habit. Sightlines. Control. The woman was already there. Rose Marsh sat straight-backed, hands wrapped around a white mug as if warmth required permission. She was younger than he expected. Calm. Ordinary in a way that made Alec uneasy. No fear in her eyes, no greed, no rehearsed charm. She looked at him once and didn't smile. Alec hadn't even taken his coat off when she spoke. She said one sentence, one she should never have known, and Alex Stone, who had stared down guns, funerals, and betrayal without blinking, froze. The diner kept moving. Cups clinked. Someone laughed nearby. A waitress passed behind Rose with a tray. The world continued as if nothing had happened. Alec didn't. If you've ever lost someone and felt time stop while everything else kept going, stay with this story. Because in that booth, under cheap Christmas lights, Alec didn't just hear a name. He felt a door crack open in the place he'd sealed shut 7 years ago. His hands rose before he decided to move them, palms pressing over his face, elbows on the table. It wasn't weakness. It was instinct. The body surrendering before the mind could rebuild its walls. Rose didn't reach for him. She didn't rush to explain. She waited. That restraint cut deeper than pity ever could. Alec lowered his hands slowly. His jaw tightened. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for a lie big enough to justify what she'd done. "You don't know what you're saying," he said. "I do," Rose replied. Her voice was steady, but there was strain beneath it. "And I know what it costs to say it to you." That should have ended it. Alex Stone didn't allow surprises. He didn't allow strangers to touch the past he'd buried, and he certainly didn't allow Christmas to turn into a weapon. Yet here he was, unable to stand, unable to speak, staring at a woman who carried a truth he'd outlawed from his own life. To understand why that single sentence broke him, you have to understand what Alec's days looked like before he walked into that diner. They were all the same. Up before dawn in a penthouse that never felt lived in. No photos, no decorations, no proof anyone belonged there. A suit chosen without thought. Black coffee that tasted like discipline. Meetings stacked on meetings, problems solved with money or fear. Work was the point. Work meant not remembering. Because remembering meant facing the night his brother died. And facing that night meant admitting the truth Alex Stone had spent years refusing to say out loud. That his brother didn't just die. He chose to save someone else. That afternoon, Alec had been in the back office of a warehouse, fluorescent lights humming overhead, numbers spread across the desk. His phone buzzed. Vance's name lit the screen. Alec almost ignored it. "Boss," Vance said, too casual. "Quick coffee. Someone wants to talk about tying up something from the past, before Christmas." That word, past, scraped something raw. Alec should have said no, but Vance had said before Christmas for a reason. Because Christmas wasn't a holiday to Alex Stone, it was an anniversary, and Alec had never survived it without bleeding. So he agreed. And a few hours later, he sat across from Rose Marsh, listening to the one name that could still undo him, and about to receive the one thing he thought was gone forever. Not forgiveness, not love, but permission to stop punishing himself for surviving. December moved around Alex Stone without ever touching him. He crossed the city wrapped in a tailored coat that might as well have been armor. Storefronts glowed with Christmas lights, wreaths hung from street lamps, speakers spilled carols onto the sidewalks, voices warm and careless. Alec passed through it all untouched, like a man walking through smoke that refused to cling. Power followed him everywhere. Doors opened before he reached them. Conversations softened when he passed. Men watched his face for permission to speak. His name carried fear, certainty, weight. Entire systems bent around his decisions. And yet, the higher he rose, the colder his world became. There was no warmth waiting for him at night, no voice asking how he was, no room left for anything human. The penthouse reflected that truth perfectly. No decorations, no photographs, no evidence anyone belonged there. The windows offered a flawless view of the city, but the glass felt thick, distant, as if it existed to keep him sealed away. Alec dressed in silence, drank his coffee black, and left without looking back. He never did. The day followed its usual rhythm. Meetings stacked tightly enough to keep memory away. Problems presented and erased. Numbers adjusted until they obeyed. His men stayed alert, watching for weakness that never came. Alec gave them nothing. Control was survival. Detachment was discipline. Feeling was a mistake he'd already paid for once. By early afternoon, the sky dulled to steel. Snow threatened, but didn't fall. Alec sat in the back office of one of his warehouses, fluorescent lights humming overhead, eyes scanning figures that no longer stirred anything in him. His phone buzzed on the desk. Vance? Alec hesitated, then answered. Boss? Vance said too carefully. Quick meeting tonight. Coffee, public place. Alec didn't look up. Who? A contact. Business, Vance replied. Just wants to talk something through before Christmas. That word scraped something raw. I don't do small talk, Alec said. It won't take long, Vance added. 5 minutes. You can walk. Alec should have said no. He almost did. But business was safe. Business didn't ask questions. Business didn't reopen graves. Send the address, Alec said. When the call ended, he stared at the dark screen longer than necessary. Something about the timing felt wrong. December always tested the walls he'd built. He told himself it was nothing. Another meeting, another hour erased. That evening, Alec stepped back into the city as snow finally began to fall. Soft, deliberate, almost gentle. He walked straight through it, unaware that the meeting he'd agreed to wasn't business at all, and that the wound he believed had long scarred over was about to be cut open by a stranger who knew exactly where to strike. Rose Marsh arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early and chose the table farthest from the door. It wasn't a strategic choice. It was instinct. Distance gave her time. Distance let her breathe. The cafe was already dressed for Christmas. Soft lights along the windows, a small tree near the counter, ornaments catching reflections they didn't deserve. The warmth inside pressed against her coat as she slid into the booth and wrapped her hands around a mug she hadn't ordered yet, just to have something steady to hold. From the outside, she looked calm, composed, like a woman waiting for a normal meeting on a winter evening. Inside, everything was tight. Rose knew exactly who Alex Stone was. Everyone did, whether they admitted it or not. His name didn't appear in headlines, but it traveled anyway. Through whispers, sudden silences, careful warnings passed between people who knew better than to be curious. Power followed him the way weather followed seasons. Unavoidable, dangerous, permanent. She had spent years convincing herself she would never be this close to him. The door chimed as customers came and went, each sound tightening something in her chest. She watched the street through the window, snow beginning to fall in thin, patient flakes. With every dark coat that passed, her pulse jumped. She rehearsed nothing. There was no script that could make this easier. The promise wouldn't allow it. Years ago, she had made it without understanding the weight of it. Made it in the aftermath of chaos, with blood on the snow and sirens tearing through the night. A promise spoken to a dying man who had looked at her not with fear, but urgency. He hadn't asked her to remember him. He hadn't asked her to forgive anyone. He had asked her to tell the truth. Not immediately. Not recklessly. Only when the time was right. Only when Alex Stone was ready to hear it. Rose had spent a long time deciding when that moment was. She had followed Alex's shadow from a distance. News that never named him. Rumors that grew darker. The way his life closed in on itself year after year. She recognized the signs even without knowing him personally. The isolation. The self-punishment disguised as discipline. The way men like him survived by refusing to feel anything at all. The waitress approached. Rose ordered coffee she wouldn't taste. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Vance. He's on his way. Rose set the phone face down and exhaled slowly. This was the last chance to leave. To stand up, walk out into the snow, and let the promise remain buried. She didn't move. Because promises like that didn't fade with time. They grew heavier. Louder. And every year she stayed silent. It felt less like protection and more like betrayal. The bell over the door chimed again. Rose looked up and saw him. Alex Stone entered the cafe without hesitation, scanning the room the way men did when danger had taught them habits they could never unlearn. Tall, controlled, distant. He carried himself like someone who had already accepted that warmth was not meant for him. Their eyes met briefly. Rose didn't smile. She waited. Because once she spoke, there would be no going back. Only the truth, finally delivered, to the man who had been living like punishment was the same thing as loyalty. Alex Stone took the seat across from Rose Marsh without removing his coat. That alone told her everything. His eyes moved first, not to her face, but to the room. Windows, counter, exits, reflections in glass. A habit carved by years of expecting betrayal. When his attention finally settled on her, it was cool, appraising, already bored. Vance said this would be quick, Alex said. His voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. You said you wanted to talk business. Rose nodded once. I did. That answer satisfied him for exactly half a second. He waited for her to continue. She didn't. The silence stretched, thin and uncomfortable, filled only by the hum of conversation around them. Alec glanced at the untouched coffee between them, then back at her face. What business? He asked. Rose inhaled slowly. She felt the moment slipping toward the edge, the point where his patience would end, and this would become just another inconvenience erased from his day. She hadn't come this far to let that happen. Before she could speak, Alec leaned back slightly, decision already forming. This isn't business, he said, not angry. Certain. You've got the wrong idea. He reached for the edge of the table, ready to stand. That was when Rose spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She said a name. Alec froze mid-movement, his fingers still touching the wood, his body caught between sitting and leaving. The name wasn't said like a weapon. It was said like something fragile, something that had been carried carefully for too long. The world didn't stop. The cafe kept breathing. Cups clinked. Someone laughed. Snow brushed against the window. Alec didn't move. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself back into the booth. His jaw tightened. His eyes, when they lifted to Rose again, were no longer bored. They were sharp, dangerous. "You don't say that name," he said quietly. Rose didn't look away. "I know." "Then you know you shouldn't be here." "I know that too." His irritation sharpened into suspicion. Alec studied her face, searching for the angle, for blackmail, for manipulation, for whatever mistake had brought her to his table. "Who told you?" he asked. "No one," Rose said. "He did." The word landed heavier than the name itself. Alec's breath stilled. "That's not possible." Rose felt the weight of his denial, but she didn't rush to fight it. "I was there," she said. "The night everything went wrong." A flicker passed through his eyes. Brief, involuntary, memory trying to surface. Alec leaned back, arms crossing, building distance with posture alone. "You're mistaken," he said. "You weren't there." Rose shook her head. "I survived." The word echoed louder than it should have. Alec's gaze dropped to the table, then lifted again. Slower this time. Something old and buried shifted behind his expression. Not belief. Not yet. Recognition. "There were no survivors," he said. Rose's voice stayed steady. There was one. Silence settled between them, thick and unfamiliar. Alec stared at her like he was seeing a ghost where there should have been nothing. For the first time since he sat down, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like someone standing at the edge of a past he had sworn never existed. And Rose knew, before she said another word, that the trap had already closed. Rose didn't rush to fill the silence. She knew better than to push when the past was already pressing in. "It was snowing," she said finally. Not like this, soft, quiet. It was heavy, loud, the kind that erased sound and made everything feel wrong. Alec didn't tell her to stop. That alone surprised him. "It was supposed to be a handoff," Rose continued. "Quick, clean. I didn't even know what I was walking into until the shouting started. Men everywhere. Guns. Someone screaming orders they didn't understand." Alec's jaw tightened. He knew the operation. Or at least, he thought he did. "I was pinned between two cars," Rose said. "I remember thinking I was going to die there in the snow and no one would ever know my name. Then I saw him." Alec's fingers curled slowly against the booth seat. "He wasn't supposed to be there," Rose said. "That much was obvious. Everything was already falling apart. Someone had moved too early. Someone else panicked." She paused, eyes flicking briefly to his. "You?" The word landed without accusation. Just fact. Alec inhaled sharply through his nose. He remembered giving the order, remembered the call, remembered being told there had been no survivors worth counting. "He heard the gun before I did," Rose said. "Turned, saw me frozen, and didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of me like it was instinct, like his body knew what his mind didn't have time to process." Her voice faltered for the first time. She steadied it. "I remember his back," she said. "The way his coat darkened almost instantly. I remember him telling me to run. Not screaming. Just firm. Like he was giving directions." Alec stared at the table. His reflection wavered in the surface of his untouched coffee. "I didn't want to leave him," Rose said. "I didn't even know his name. But he shoved me, hard enough that I fell. And that fall saved my life." She swallowed. "By the time I looked back, he was already on his knees." The cafe felt smaller, the walls closer. "They told you there were no survivors," Rose said quietly. "That the fallout was total. That nothing went wrong except what had to." Alec's chest tightened. That was exactly what he'd been told. What he'd repeated to himself every year since. "He was alive when I reached him," Rose went on. "Barely. He grabbed my wrist and made me promise something." Alec's head lifted slowly. "No," he said. It came out rough. He didn't. He did, Rose said. He made me promise I wouldn't let you keep living like it was your fault. The words sliced deeper than any accusation could have. Alec shook his head once, a small, broken movement. He wasn't supposed to be there, he said. I never sent him. I know, Rose replied. He went anyway. The truth settled between them, heavy and unmoving. For years, Alec had believed his brother died because of incompetence, because of chaos, because that was easier than believing the alternative. That his brother had chosen to disobey him, chosen to save someone, chosen a different ending than the one Alec had written in his mind. And in that moment, Alec Stone felt the story he'd survived on begin to fracture, one quiet truth at a time. Alec didn't speak for a long time. The cafe noise faded into something distant, like it was happening in another room. Rose watched him carefully, aware that whatever came next would either break him open or seal him shut forever. He knew he didn't have much time, she said at last. He was losing blood fast. He kept trying to sit up, like his body hadn't accepted what was happening yet. Alec's hands rested flat on the table now, palms down, fingers spread, anchoring himself. He wasn't scared, Rose continued, not the way people usually are. He was angry, but not at you, at himself, like he wished he'd had more time to fix things. Alec's throat tightened. He never liked unfinished business, he said quietly. Rose nodded. That sounds like him. She took a breath, steadying herself. He asked me my name. I told him. He repeated it, like he was memorizing it. Then he said, You're going to live. That matters. Alec closed his eyes. For years, Rose went on, I thought he said that for me. But I understand now. It wasn't just about saving a stranger. It was about you. Alec opened his eyes slowly. Me. He said you were good at carrying weight that wasn't yours, Rose said. That you'd been doing it since you were kids. He said you confused punishment with loyalty. The words landed heavy, precise, too precise to be coincidence. He told me, Rose continued, voice soft but unwavering, that if you ever started living like his death was a debt you had to keep paying, I was supposed to stop you. Alec shook his head faintly. That's not fair, he said. He died because of my world. He died because he chose to, Rose replied. Those are not the same thing. Alec stared at the candle between them, its flame bending with every small movement of air. For years he had carried his brother's death like proof of failure, proof that love made men weak, proof that survival was something to be ashamed of. You know what he said last? Rose asked. Alec didn't answer. He couldn't trust his voice. He said, If Alec survives this by turning himself into stone, then my death meant nothing. The words struck deeper than any accusation ever could. Alec's breath came slow and unsteady now. The guilt didn't vanish. It didn't dissolve or lift. It shifted. For the first time, the weight he carried wasn't just grief. It was responsibility. Not to suffer endlessly, but to live honestly. Not to punish himself, but to honor a choice his brother had made with clear eyes. Survival, Alec realized, wasn't lighter than death. It was heavier, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he could carry it the way he always had. Rose let the silence sit between them until it softened. I didn't come here to reopen wounds, she said finally. I came because I ran out of time pretending you didn't need to hear this. Alec didn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, on the thin crack in the wood running between them like a fault line. You said he made you promise something, he said. This is where you tell me what it was. Rose nodded. Her fingers tightened around the mug. He made me promise I wouldn't tell you right away. Not when everything was raw, not when you were still surrounded by people who would let you turn his death into armor. Alec exhaled slowly. Armor. The word fit too well. He said you'd know when it was time, Rose continued, that you'd look alive on the outside and completely gone on the inside. That's when I was supposed to find you. Alec's jaw flexed. And if I never got there? You did, Rose said gently. You just didn't realize it. She reached into her coat pocket, hesitated, then placed her hand flat on the table instead. He didn't leave a letter. He didn't have the strength, but he made me repeat the words until I got them right. Alec finally looked up. Rose met his eyes. He said, "Tell Alec I didn't die because of him. I died because I chose to step forward." Alec's breath caught. He said you'd try to rewrite it, Rose went on. Turn it into punishment. Turn it into a life where you never let yourself feel anything again. The candle between them flickered. He told me to say this exactly, Rose said. If you build a prison out of my death, you will turn my choice into a lie. Alec's hands curled slowly, like he was holding on to something invisible. He said, Rose continued, voice steady despite the weight of it, loyalty isn't measured by how much pain you carry. It's measured by whether you live well enough to justify the sacrifice. The words didn't explode. They sank. For years, Alec had believed grief was something you proved through endurance, that surviving meant shrinking, that love was something you paid for with silence and self-denial. Rose watched his face change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small fractures, the kind that let light through. I kept the promise, she said quietly. I waited until you could hear it without destroying yourself. Alec swallowed. And now? Now, Rose said, I've given you what he wanted you to have. Alec leaned back slightly, as if the weight he'd carried had shifted in his hands. It was still there. Heavy, unavoidable, but it no longer felt like a sentence. For the first time, the prison he'd built around his grief had a door. And Alec Stone realized, terrified and unsteady, that he might finally be allowed to open it. Alec didn't answer. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. The cafe sounds returned in fragments, the low murmur of voices, the scrape of a chair, the hiss of the espresso machine, but they felt distant, unreal, like noise filtering through water. Alec's shoulders stayed rigid, his posture locked in place as if moving might shatter whatever fragile balance was holding him upright. Then his hands came up. Slowly, deliberately. He covered his face with both palms, elbows resting on the table, his head bowing just enough to break the line of his spine. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sob, no sharp inhale that demanded attention, just stillness, complete and absolute. Rose didn't reach for him. She understood what this was. For years, Alec Stone had perfected control, every breath measured, every reaction weighed. He had learned how to absorb loss without letting it show, how to turn grief into structure, pain into discipline. The world feared him because he never broke. But this wasn't breaking. This was release. His fingers pressed harder against his face, like he was holding himself together from the inside. A single breath escaped him. Slow, uneven, followed by another. The weight he'd carried for so long finally had somewhere to go, and his body didn't know how to let it out gently. He stayed that way, unmoving, while something old and buried finally caught up with him. He saw his brother the way he hadn't allowed himself to in years. Not as a mistake, not as collateral, not as a ghost that haunted every decision. He saw him alive. Laughing too loud, arguing when he should have walked away, choosing people over orders, choosing compassion over safety, choosing again and again to be human. Alec's jaw trembled once. Just once. All the moments he'd refused to mourn came rushing in. The conversations that ended too soon, the words he never said because there was always time later. The brother who had stepped forward without hesitation while Alec had stayed behind, believing leadership meant distance. For the first time, Alec let himself feel the full shape of that loss, not as guilt, as absence, The realization hurt more than anything else ever had. His shoulders sagged slightly, the smallest surrender. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he didn't let them fall, not because he was afraid, but because even this release had limits. Still, the ache in his chest was undeniable now, heavy and alive. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were red but clear. Something in his expression had shifted, not softened, not weakened, but stripped of its armor. Rose met his gaze without pity. Alec exhaled, long and slow. "I never said goodbye," he murmured. The words barely carried across the table, but they landed. And in that quiet cafe booth, the man feared by many finally allowed himself to grieve. Not the brother he lost that night, but the years he'd spent punishing himself instead of mourning him. It wasn't weakness. It was the first honest thing he'd done in a very long time. They didn't rush the ending. When Alec finally stood, it wasn't abrupt or rehearsed. He placed a few bills on the table without looking at them, pulled on his coat, and waited. Not for permission. For Rose. Outside, the snow had thickened, falling in slow, deliberate sheets that muted the city's sharp edges. The streetlights blurred into halos. Traffic moved more quietly, as if the night itself had learned restraint. Alec stepped out first, the cold biting through his coat. His men were there, of course, across the street near the car, shadows pretending not to watch him too closely. Habit, protection, walls with legs. He didn't acknowledge them. Rose hesitated at the door, then followed. The bell chimed once behind them, sealing the moment they were leaving behind. "I can call a car," she said, more reflex than request. Alec shook his head. "I'll walk." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't brave. It was simply true. They moved side by side down the sidewalk, not close enough to touch, not far enough to feel distant. Snow gathered in Rose's hair. Alec didn't comment. He kept his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been in years. No one spoke. The city filled the space instead. Footsteps muffled by snow, the low hum of distant engines, the faint echo of laughter drifting from somewhere warm and unseen. Alec felt strangely exposed walking like this, unguarded, unhurried. But beneath the unease was something else. Awareness. He noticed how Rose adjusted her pace when the sidewalk narrowed, how she glanced at icy patches before stepping, how ordinary the moment was. No threat, no agenda, just two people moving through the same stretch of night. At the corner near her building, she slowed. The lights from the lobby spilled onto the snow, pale and steady. "This is me," she said. Alec nodded. He didn't ask for more. He didn't offer promises he wasn't ready to keep. "Thank you," he said instead, "for the truth, for the weight, for not letting him hide anymore." Rose held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod and turned toward the entrance. Alec watched her go until the door closed behind her, and the light disappeared. Only then did he look back down the street. His car waited. His men straightened, ready to resume their roles. The life he knew stood exactly where he'd left it. Alec didn't move right away. He breathed in the cold air, let it fill his lungs, felt the ache still there, unresolved, heavy, but no longer suffocating. He wasn't healed. He knew that. But he was awake. And for the first time in years, Alec Stone didn't disappear behind walls. He walked toward them by choice. Winter loosened its grip slowly that year. By the time spring arrived, Alec Stone had already begun doing something unfamiliar, choosing action over punishment. Not loudly, not for show. Quiet changes that didn't announce themselves, but altered the shape of his days. He pulled back from meetings that existed only to keep him busy. He redirected money that once fed violence into places that didn't know his name. A shelter reopened on the south side, under a foundation no one could trace back to him. A scholarship appeared where none had existed. He didn't attach his brother's face to any of it. He didn't need to. This wasn't repentance. It was responsibility. The ache never vanished. Some mornings Alec still woke before dawn with his chest tight, the memory of snow and blood pressing close. But he no longer used that pain as proof he deserved isolation. He carried it differently now. Not as a sentence, but as something to live up to. Months passed without contact. He didn't seek Rose out. That mattered. What she'd given him wasn't a bond that needed constant reinforcement. It was a door. Whether he walked through it was his choice alone. He thought of her sometimes, usually in quiet moments, crossing a street at night, watching steam rise from a coffee cup, noticing how much of life existed outside control. She remained exactly what she'd been that night in December. A truth delivered, and then left alone. It was late November when he saw her again. Another cafe. Different street. Same kind of light glowing through the windows. Warm, steady, real. Christmas decorations were already going up, careless and hopeful. Alec stood outside for a moment, watching his reflection blur in the glass. Then he went in. Rose was seated near the window, reading, her coat draped over the chair beside her. She looked up, surprised but not startled. The surprise softened into recognition. Alec stopped at her table. "Mind if I join you?" She considered him for a second, then nodded. "I don't." They talked, not about promises or guilt or the night that changed everything. They spoke about ordinary things. Work, weather, the strange comfort of routines that no longer felt like cages. There was no urgency, no debt hanging between them. Outside, Christmas lights flickered on as evening settled, reflections dancing across the glass. Alec noticed them this time. Not with resentment, not with distance. He stayed. When they finally stood to leave, it wasn't because he needed to escape. It was simply time. Alec paused at the door, glancing once more at the lights outside, then back at Rose. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like survival was something to endure alone. What remained wasn't loss. It was space. And this time, Alec Stone didn't walk away from it.